Welcome, friends, to Speaking of Good Friday. We do have friends on our live stream and here in this space. This is a new experiment this year. When there are often services of worship, we are choosing instead to have a heartfelt conversation. Here is how it will proceed. If you didn't gather a packet at either of the entrances, get one of these packets of papers for yourself. These are 3 sets of questions that we will move through in our time together this evening, and we'll place them in front of the camera for those on live stream as each one arises. What we'll do is open our hearts and our minds to a set of questions. I will ring the singing bowl, and Sharon will play for a few minutes while we each consider that set of questions. And I encourage you to have a pen or pencil and mark down your thoughts for yourself, whether or not you choose to share them. And then when the music comes to the end on that set of questions, I'll move around with a basket because I encourage you to be anonymous if your feelings and thoughts are vulnerable and you'd like me to read them aloud instead of your voice, then you can place them here after those few minutes of reflection. And otherwise, there will also be the opportunity to speak right into the microphone if you'd like. And the hope is that we'll respond directly to one another as I read one person's contribution. I might hold a moment and see if anyone has something to offer in response directly to that. And we'll hear our thoughts throughout this evening. So let us move into this time of contemplation. Our first questions. Jesus' suffering and death. What meaning and impact did Jesus' suffering and death have for your faith and worldview when you were young? And how has that shifted throughout your life? What role does Jesus have in your life now? Like to share your thoughts or feelings anonymously, I'll come with a basket so you can set them in. If anybody would like to, they can add it to the basket and I'll say it aloud for you. seeing none, would love to hear from one another. So again, with a spirit of hearing each one who cares to share aloud and leaving a pause in case there's a piggyback, a direct response you have to someone. Who would be willing to share their thought?
Don't make me go first. Somebody has to. All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing you want to say, a person like me would say, define your terms. What does young mean? So there's different varieties of young. The first time I really even thought about it, about
I think it needs
Jesus'
to be
death,
closer to you.
the first time I probably thought about Jesus' death was before I really understood what it was to be a Christian, and I thought of it more in political terms, that he was part of a movement, a political movement, to get rid of the Romans. And then I thought, he's a really bad politician, because it turned out as bad as it could. So that was the first time I really thought about that at all, was in those kind of secular terms, because I wasn't a Christian at that time. I completely believed that Jesus existed, that he was a true historical figure. That was never a question for me. So that was kind of how I adapted to that. However, as I, in time, grew in my faith, it made me really afraid of being a Christian, because I'm going to maybe be asked to make a huge sacrifice that I'm not going to be capable of making. And so that kind of made me keep that all at an arm's length. Oh, that was him. I hope I mean, not necessarily die for my faith, but to give up some things. Giving up your life is the ultimate sacrifice. So that made me kind of step away from it too. Over the last maybe 10 years or so, I've adapted my sense of this to feeling like, okay, if I'm asked to make a sacrifice, a big one, a little one, it's okay, because that's what I'm supposed to do. And it's made me feel a lot more at ease with being a Christian and willing to share that with other people as part of that journey. So it's no static kind of thing for me. It's an evolutionary thing, and it's going to probably continue to evolve.
Thank you.
Did I do okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
And so then if anyone wants to respond directly to what Bob shared, or feels like, oh, your thought might go well with that, or next. Just hold it pretty close to our mouths.
Well, you could spend years thinking about this question, and I think I have. As a minister, I used to, in the beginning, it was very difficult to talk about something that I didn't feel very genuine about. And it was a struggle working through it. I had to come up with things that were authentic and honest and not just parroting some of those things that I had been taught when I was younger. So that was the work of kind of a theological work in my life. But I thought tonight, I was thinking about when I was young, like a child, sitting in church, and on Good Friday, I'd just try to conjure up something that would make me sad, and so I could cry and be part of the story. But it didn't work very well, and I'd sit there and think of things that make me sad because it seemed like that was the story about it. And I think that was my motivation, was this isn't right. If this is about this God they talk about in this community, then it's got to be something that I can talk about in joy and sadness, but not feel like I got to conjure it up to make the grade. And all the things of shame that come around like that, I wasn't very good at. My mom was pretty good about not shaming us kids, so it was that was a gift, and it helped me in my theology to resist the shame and be open to the love and the grace and the openness of God. So that's one little minute thing there.
Yeah, just in adding to that, just that whole redemption theology that Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden and all of us are sinners. I was raised Catholic. I have original sin on my soul. And I took that very seriously. I really did. And, felt really bad that Jesus died and went through all that because of me, all these people. And I stayed away from churches, and even I was agnostic for many years, and a lot of it's redemption theology that just like, I just can't buy this. And then I started going to a really positive, upbeat Unity church, and their message is, no, you're not inherently bad, you're inherently good. You're a child of God, and you're beautiful, and you're very able to love and be loved. And I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. So, yeah, and then I was just sharing with these two, my relationship with Jesus has really changed. John, my husband, is a big Jesus person. And when we first met, we'd get into arguments about this, like that's not literal, that's allegorical. And I was coming around to being open up to Jesus. I was more a mother, father, creator, and the Holy Spirit. I think of her as a mother and feminine. But this author that Naomi turned me on, Neil Douglas Klotz, and the revelations of the Aramaic Jesus, and reading the words translated directly from Aramaic, what Jesus said, has just been a boom to who Jesus really was. I mean, it's just, it's amazing.
Well, I became an early skeptic as a child. I accepted that Jesus probably died. I didn't know how, but I accepted, that it might have been the Romans. But definitely I knew as a child it wasn't for my sins. I was too good a girl. And then as an adult, well, we didn't have to go to confession, as Lutherans. So as an adult, when I started studying other religions, I definitely, was looking at the Good Friday experience as suffering as part of the whole human drama, that it's part of life. And I was okay with that. I hadn't felt, I never bought into the redemptive, theology, so that was okay. And anyway, I guess that's enough.
Would anyone else like to share? So the meaning and impact of Jesus' suffering and death, and how that was for you as a child, and how it's evolved, if it has?
As a young person growing up in this church, there was the focus was on an empty cross. So, and I didn't have, I never went to a Catholic church, so I didn't see, the crucifix, and the focus was on Easter. So it was all about joy and new life. So as a young person, I didn't think at all about the cross being an instrument of torture and death. But then in my 30s and 40s, I took these intense study classes and was really, really learning more about the torture of the time and that process. Just those 24 hours, even less than 24 hours from the Passover, from the Last Supper, and then the sham trial through the night, and the just the humiliation and the betrayal and the lies and the sham trial, and then the torture. So it became more real to me, and Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday services have become my favorite, because I'm a very hopeful person. I live in hope, and I don't want to I want to just revisit all that Jesus, that he was tortured and murdered. Just a couple years ago, I was in Mexico at a place which was when the Spaniards came and they were bringing Catholicism, and the indigenous people couldn't read, and so everything was in pictures. And so you cannot believe the gore and the blood and the suffering, and just this blood dripping everywhere and gushing out the side, and to have things were so graphic, and it was so fear-based then. And so you better believe this. And I just didn't grow up with any of that. So I'm still very interested. I have friends that live in Spain right now, and they've been sending me pictures about the processions this week, and people in it looks like Ku Klux Klan, but it's not. They're completely covered in these robes, and they're in penance. And I don't know anything about that history, but it's their history, and I want to learn more about that. And it's not part of my history. Like I said, the cross was always a real hopeful and joyful. Death is not the end, and it's only as adults that I've been learning about the brutality.
Would anyone else like to share on this question? Okay, well, let's move to the next set of questions then. So, political oppression then and now. In Jesus' time, the occupying Roman army publicly mocked, tortured, and crucified individuals who engaged in civil disobedience. Where do you see this happening today, and how might we respond? I was able to shift the camera so that those who are with us on live stream can also view those of us who are here in person. Would anyone, I'll pass the basket in case you'd like me to say your part for you, but I gather that folks are game to speak aloud if you'd wish. So who would like to share on that set of questions? And just hold it again close to our mouth.
Is it on?
Yep.
I think we heard a collective gasp when you read the question, because sadly, it's happening right here in this country as people are jailed, fired, deported, simply because they are disobeying the administration. And I have been thinking all day long about, did Christ die in vain? Because nothing seems to have changed since his time. There are still such evil people doing such hurtful, horrible things to so many that I'm just wondering, and I asked God, Jesus today often, do you regret doing it? Why did you do it? Is it ever going to change? So that has been my thought all day long. And how I respond is, like many of us, rallying, protesting. There are several going on all across the country, world, state. That's about all we can do and pray and hope.
Who else would like to speak aloud?
I just prepared some thoughts and notes today, and one person I thought of is René Girard. He's a French kind of philosopher, not really a theologian, but mimetic theory is what he's known for, and it's tried to explain the mechanism behind scapegoatism. And we have a lot of scapegoat, witch hunts in the powers that be now, finding people to blame for our economy or for whatever. And he says that rivalry is kind of at the basis of finding a scapegoat, or seeing the separateness between all of us, not seeing the oneness, how what I do to you impacts me. It's an extreme of seeing us all separate and, fighting for it. And the scapegoat has to be removed, killed, so that we can feel better and have a good life, basically, at the bottom of it. And he says that the crucifixion of Jesus was the one scapegoat plot that really backfired on us, because he truly embodied complete innocence and love. And the human race has not been able to justify, smutting out love. I mean, it can't justify. Love is a lot of times ridiculed, made fun of as something weak. And, So, and then one other thing that fits this too, John is a big Schopenhauer philosopher reader. And Schopenhauer believes that some people find pleasure in inflicting pain and suffering on other people. There is that within us. But he also says that we're capable of deep compassion and love too, the same philosopher. But the idea that some people get pleasure in our ego, Adamic, A-D-A-M, selves, get pleasure. And that's scary. But I don't know, and to Sherry, I just want to address what you said. I think we've all asked that question, and I don't know, I see it all as a big, long evolutionary process, and I hope the human race has come a ways from just the reptilian brain and the amygdala living where it's eat or be eaten. I think we've come a little bit past that, but we've got a ways to go, and we're all in it together. We can't separate ourselves from those people that are harming others. We can't point fingers at them, really. That's all. I better stop there.
Yeah, I believe that there are always going to be people that, including all of us, who feel the need for power in some situations, and some more than others. And I keep thinking of, can't remember where it said, but, the old order has to die for the new one to be born. And in terms of how we respond today to what is happening, I keep thinking we need to keep imagining what the new order should look like. To protest, but also to be part of envisioning what else is needed.
Ooh, I say amen to that. To keep imagining. Would anyone else like to share on this set of questions?
Things haven't changed much. The soldiers that took Jesus down from the cross, they're our neighbors today. They're probably in our own families. And what will ever change that? I don't know.
That's all I have to, it's to love and be present in a certain way, to hold, I always refer to it from groups I've been in, holding the center of the circle, where the Christ in the, holding the center of the circle, no matter what's going on around, is really hard. And you just have to keep doing it over and over and over again, and believe that will make a difference. You just have to believe. It's a kind of faith, in a way. Believe in love.
I have to take my turn. I think it's all in the little things. So like when Jesus was hanging on the cross, dying, what did he do to the one next to him? He forgave him, in the midst of his suffering. That was a little thing, but it was the most important, huge thing. And, little things are huge things. So anytime we listen to somebody, engage in a conversation, write a letter, give a hug, just smile, all of those things, you cannot believe what a huge difference they can make in somebody's life. And so I think if we just respond by doing little things, those little things are really huge things.
A prophetic word. Anyone else? And know that even if we go on to the third set of questions, if you have something you realize you want to share from an earlier, that's welcome as well. Well, our third set of questions. God, suffering, and hope. Where and what or who is God in the midst of human suffering? And what supports you and us in moving from despair to hope? Let's take some time with those questions. What thoughts would we like to share with one another in terms of where and who or what is God in the midst of so much suffering, and what supports you? What could support us in moving from the despair of this time? This time meaning Sorrowful Friday, as I saw it named on a bulletin of a Minneapolis church, and from this time that we are also in, from despair to hope.
I'll start. It kind of piggybacks on how I started, which is, I think the empty cross and the fact that Jesus, the human, was human, experienced everything we are going to experience, including our death. We are all going to die. Hopefully, we will not be tortured and hung on a cross. But to me, there's this, for me personally, there's that underpinning that nothing can separate me from the love of God. Or if God is love, nothing can separate me from love. And I also believe that love is more powerful than hate and fear. And that keeps me from despair, or from moving from despair to hope, that nothing can separate us.
Thanks. Several years ago, I had a friend whose 19-year-old son was killed in a car accident. And just a horrible accident, but nothing more than an accident. And I remember my friend talking about what people said to her at a funeral or a wake service about, like, well, he's in a better place. Or, we have to, it was God's will. And she thought, God mourns with me. He doesn't want to make me a stronger person by taking my son away from me, taking that light of my life away. And so she went through a thing of, if I prayed more, would my son still be alive? But no. It's God was mourning with her. And I think God mourns with us in our times of fear, in our times of trouble, in our times of despair. And I think we have a responsibility to each other to help us through that. And that gives me hope. That gives me really hope that we can have a circle of people to help us through that. Does it heal everything? No. But does it make it better? Yeah, it does.
I was a little bit struck when Mary said some minutes ago that I think you tend to be on the hopeful side, maybe, and I don't, but I'm working on it. And I just had an image from the last project that I came to. I'm often surprised by where I see goodness and great humans and God and love, but this was a group of a lot of Kurdish people, a lot of people from Afghanistan, a growing South Sudanese, Ethiopian, Eritrean population in northern France, and they're all camping some kilometers from the shore, waiting basically to be called to get on a raft to try to travel over to the UK. But we had seen a very tall South Sudanese man, and he had dropped boiling water on his foot preparing tea, and he didn't need to go to the hospital, but we washed it and cared for, and bandaged him up and asked him to come back the next day. And we usually work from like 10:30 until 4, so we were packing up our tent clinic, and in the distance we see a very, very tall South Sudanese man with an even taller South Sudanese man on his shoulders. and they're walking. The one guy's carrying the guy with the burn on his shoulders, like a little bit more than half a mile from where their tent is, to clinic, and then he just bends over and kind of gently puts his friend on the ground, and we got like our weekend parent watching soccer, like those little flimsy camping chairs, basically, which are our clinic chairs, and like a cement block, and put his foot out and do the whole. We were almost all packed up. Anyhow, it was such a beautiful thing of his friend bringing him and making sure he got this imperfect but what we could offer care for this for this burn. And anyhow, so I got to see on different days a different friend would bring him to clinic like that. And then there's also this guy from Ethiopia who had gotten kind of sick and actually needed to go to the hospital for something beyond what we could provide him. And then multiple days in a row, in the rain and the sunshine, so I knew his face, and his name's Philemon. They say it differently, and in Ethiopia, but one of the books of the Bible. Anyhow, so I was, oh, how you doing? Oh, I'm great. And he just had this like big smile, and I thought it was so. Oh, I have so much, or we all have so much to learn. But these are people who are standing in line for every hot or cold meal, shower, charging station for their phone, any medical care, anyhow, any new T-shirt or underwear. And so I thought, wow, I'd like a little bit of that. Anyhow, so also what Cindy said about like, because often I say, wow, there's so little we can do, but then I always say, but that little is not nothing. So I just kind of keep stacking the little, but so thanks.
Who else would like to say something to this question?
So the question of where and what story, and I believe that God is everywhere. And I guess I added I'm thinking of a when. So like with the suffering. So he's before the suffering, he's in the suffering, and he's after the suffering. And that's the thought that kind of came to my mind with this question. But then right after that, it's something that happened with my sister. So, my sister sees spirits. She seems to have like this direct line to God, and it's like, it's really unusual. It doesn't make her more spiritual than any of us. It's just her gift. So she was going up north with my parents, and she heard God tell her, bring 2 towels. And she argued back with him, because that's the kind of relationship they have, talk back and forth to each other. He goes, why would I do that? I was told I didn't need to bring any towels, and he says it again. And she goes, why would I bring 2 towels? But he was really insistent. Fine then. So she brought the 2 towels, because she was told there wasn't going to be any room in the car, so don't bring anything more than you absolutely need. And so here she's bringing these 2 towels, brings them all the way up there. No need for them while she's there. Well, on the way back, those 2 towels were needed. They were first to respond to an accident. Those towels were needed to stop that blood. And then they, called for help, and then they came, people came and then took over for her. So, he knew that was going to happen. He worked, and what is God? God's in us. We're working with people and helping people because either it's just from our own love because God's in us, or God's prompted us to do something because he knows what's going to be needed. So that's my story.
I want to offer a thought of my own. It maybe encompasses a few of the questions of the evening, but I think my understanding from the first question of Jesus' suffering and death as a child echoed what someone shared here, which is that it's at least partly my fault, or, oh, maybe it was Mary Martin said she didn't buy it. But yeah, that I was supposed to feel guilty. And so I learned and tried to practice that guilt and feeling like that I was responsible for Jesus' death. And it never held a lot of water for me, thankfully, because that kind of toxic theology can do spiritual trauma to people, for sure, that takes a lifetime to recover from, or that one never recovers from. So that was how I understood. And then now Jesus is sort of my teacher, my best teacher, and my best example. And I'm so much more excited to be following Jesus now as a more progressive, I'll use that word, a more progressive Christian than as a child. And this one, this question about, they talk about it as theodicy, why is there suffering in the world, and where and what is God during all this suffering? And I almost a story of its own would be my son Sam being born with a very complex and scary and morbid syndrome that we had no idea in my family line that I would be the first body to carry its mutation. And wow, to go back to something that Mary shared, and the friend who was people attempting probably of goodwill to comfort her, with, oh, maybe that person you've lost is in a better place, and those sort of quips. Boy, if I thought that God had a plan had a human brain with a plan for Jesus to suffer, I don't know what I would do with living this human life if there was some sense of a God who was intending this terrible suffering for Jesus, for your neighbor's family, or for my son, that God had a plan for Sam to have a terrible life-limiting syndrome. And so the sailor mouth in me says, we just have shit luck. Yes, it happened, and it's terrible, but I'm sure not going to pin it on God, because for me, God is an energy of love in the midst of all of our suffering, of all the different, because just like we don't have to be too hard on ourselves on measuring how good, Cindy, when you said everything can have impact of good that we can do, also, what's the point of measuring and trying to measure our own suffering, other people's suffering? There is a lot of suffering to go around too, but I believe that God is then, in my story with Sam, I think if I had a theology that thought that God had planned that for us in an evil little way, I guess, then I think I would be shattered, and I don't think I'd be a functional person right now. So I'm so grateful for a God that is a loving energy and not a planner of difficult experiences. Would anyone else like to share on this about suffering and what God is in that? Okay.
All these terrible things are happening around the world, the wars, and people have nothing, they've lost everything, but you look at the news and you see these people helping their neighbors dig through the rubble to find a lost loved one. And, in this country, that senator who went down to El Salvador, he didn't have to do that against all odds, and at least brought back a little bit of hope for that family. So, and you don't even have to do anything that big to be helpful.
Yeah. So I just want to lift up into the microphone that fact that people will attend to others and will notice the suffering, be watchful and observant enough to see, and maybe take pause of, in what way could I take action? In what way could I be love or be compassion in a space? Anything else to share on this question?
A thought came to me, the cross is what we've done with it, in doctrine and what we've been taught about it. I was trying to stick it into places, and it comes out pretty bizarre. Like, you said somebody who would say something about you in terms of that being God's will, and sort of like sticking it in there. But I think the cross emerges out of the stories of our lives. And when we see it come from a story of suffering, as you shared, Aiden, and we've all shared in some form, then it's African Americans have a lot of music and a lot of song that says beauty in the midst of the struggle. And if I want to know about that, that's a culture that has a story to tell in our country. And then also my son used to work with disability. Iowa as a lawyer, and then now works with legal aid as a lawyer. But in Iowa, he basically shut down the state training school after a period and a fight and a struggle. It was a struggle, and he had politicians after him, and it was horrible what they were doing to these kids in the prison. But everybody stood up for the warden of the prison. He was a wonderful white man that everybody knew, and he was doing the best for these kids that were being improperly taken care of and being shoved into solitary confinement. Some of them didn't even have records. And I like what he said, very simple, just what we all know. But the warden was after him, and what are you trying to do? Who do you think you are? You're telling these kids they have rights? Who does that? Why are you doing this? He says, because they do have rights, and because it is the law that they have rights, and we can stand up for them. And that's one of those places where, whether it's in El Salvador or there, or what we see on TV, when the cross emerges, it is about grace and beauty, and not about, the horrors, but that in the spite of all of that, there's someone who speaks, or there's a word that comes to recreate possibility, or it comes out of the suffering, not out of our lives that are perfect, but out of a mess. And justice is a mess. and it's not easy to do. It's very messy. And so here we are, sitting in the mess, with our eyes open.
I just want to say, the way I hold on is just living in the present moment, and that ties into what you said, Cindy, about the little things. I cannot listen to the news. I cannot gather in all this stuff, because then I just don't sleep at all. So I just have to stay in the present moment for the people right around me. I love being with the people in this church. I love being in this physical space. It just nourishes me so much.
Anyone else on God in the midst of suffering? Well, then I invite us to come to a close of our time together. Would you join me here in an ovular circle up front as we close this time? We could hold hands. Most importantly, try to make sure you can see everyone in the space. With gratitude to Sharon for adding the beauty of music to this time. With gratitude to those who set the space for us with the beauty of candlelight. And the reminder with the crown of thorns of the mockery and cruel treatment then and now as we've brought to light this evening. And with gratitude that these are companions, as you look around the circle, companions on this journey and this time. And I invite us to bring our hands to Heart Center and just remind ourselves, as comes from other traditions, that the light inside of each of us, just touch your chest, the light of you, the light of yourself, sees and honors the light, and look around at the others here, honors the light in one another as well. Let's go from this space in some sort of peace, but willing to still be disturbed by the violence and by the suffering, so that we'll want to reach out with the compassion of God's love. Amen.